Welcome to lesson 7. In this lesson, we are going to develop an assignment feedback sub-plugin. We're going to look at the admin settings API. We're going to use and look at the JavaScript framework. So you have heard me use the word sub-plugins several times before. We mentioned when we were looking at reports that SCORM, etc. have reports that can be plugged in separate from the reporting the reporting functionality in core Moodle, and those are kind of sub plugins to those particular activity modules. So core sub plugin support is really only for some types of plugins. Now remember, when we were talking about the course format, the course format is kind of a sub plugin, but I don't think it's strictly regarded as a sub plugin. Okay, so the four different areas where sub plugins are supported are activity modules. So like I mentioned, SCORM with the reports, and we'll see another one now, the assignment module. HTML editors, so your auto editors, etc. Local plugins from Moodle 2.6, so editors from 2.4, local plugins from 2.6, admin tools as well from 2.6. Okay, and some modules and some plugins will have more than one type of sub plugin. So for example, the assignment activity module, which we are going to be working with in this lesson, has two sub plugin types: submissions and feedback. And let's go and have a look at those now. So I'm going to log in as admin, and we're going to go to our test course, and in our section 1, so this one here is section 0 at the top of the announcements forum. In our first section, we have two assignments set out there, and then these are other resources. So if I turn editing on, right, we can look at one of the assignments. So I'll edit the settings of this assignment, and we'll go through this. Now, a lot of the activity modules, remember when we speak about modules, we are talking about both activities and resources. Resources are ones that are static, kind of links, files, etc. Activities is where the user is expected to interact with the activity. Okay, and they will have some common settings, and the settings page will have some common settings that are common to all modules, or common to all activities if you're editing an activity, or all modules if all resources if you are editing a resource. Now on top of that, if your plugin supports sub plugins, then in the same screen, in the same settings, you will have the opportunity to collect information or settings for your sub plugins. So in this case, with the assignment, this is an assignment module, activity module. Right, we've got things like availability, which will be standard across, I think it's across activities rather than resources, etc. And then we have down here two kind of setting areas. Right, now these are the actual sub plugins settings. So we have submission types, like I mentioned before. So these are the type of submissions the user can use to submit their work. So online text or file submissions, and this can be extended by plugins. And then the feedback types, which is the tutor giving feedback to the student about the work that they've done. And then down here we've got some extra settings for submission. I'm not quite sure whether these are specific to assignment, the assignment activity, but you have those. And then you'll have things like notifications, which is standard across the board. So we need to turn our attention now to our plugin. So we are going to develop an assignment feedback sub-plugin, which will allow the tutor, the teacher, the lecturer to record audio feedback for the student to listen to. And so let's get started. So our plugin is going to live in the mod, which is where the modules live, assign. Now, before I go on, not assignment, this is the old style assignment that was deprecated in 2.3, Moodle 2.3. However, it's stuck around all these versions up to, which is version 3.11 at the moment. But there was a when the new assign, which is in the the new assignment plugin module was released, there was a way for people to migrate from the old assignment to the new assignment. But for some reason, the supporter for the old assignment has stayed in, because people had invested quite a lot of time and effort in creating assignments in the old style. So it's stuck around. So we're talking about in the assign folder, not in the assignment folder. And then we go into our assign, and then the feedback is where the feedback sub plugins live. And we are going to set our one, and it's going to be called audio. So a new folder, audio, and we'll do our language folder at the same time as usual. Okay, and so we start off with our usual thing, the version PHP file. And so this is our file, and we needed to, for our feedback plugin, we have two other required strings that need to be defined, the enabled and the enabled underscore help, and you'll see why in a short while. So the other file that we need for our plugin is settings PHP. Now, we've come across settings PHP before, where we used it basically as a little bit of an extension to the navigation. Now we are going to talk about the settings PHP as the proper settings, the global settings, the admin settings for your plugin. So let's have a look at that before we create our settings PHP file. So for many of the plugins you will develop, you may require some global settings to change the behavior of the plugin. For example, you might point to URLs to external services, or define the number of results on pages if it has to do with searches and making lists, etc. And these global settings as such are defined in the plugin's settings.php file. Now, for most plugins, the global settings variable, which is an object, it's a sort of tree object, is already defined, and the script can just add directly the configuration settings it wants to collect. So here's an example. You check that the admin full tree is available, and then you add in a setting. So you'll notice this is a new admin settings config select, which is a select element. Okay, and the parameters are very similar to a select. Okay. The admin settings are sort of, they're kind of related to the form API elements, and you'll see a lot of them are very similar and accept probably the same parameters. So for example, for a checkbox, you would define an admin settings config checkbox object, and you would pass in the same parameters as you would for a checkbox, and that would be your setting. And all the available classes are defined in the adminlib.php file in the lib folder. Now, for some plugins, such as local plugins, the global settings variable is not set. And in that case, the plugin needs to create its settings and add it directly to the global admin tree. Okay, and here's an example of that. So this is checking if the user has site admin configuration capabilities, you create a new admin settings page for the plugin. So this is an example local plugin, and then you enable the plugin by maybe defining your settings. So again, this is a checkbox example. And notice the use of the lang underscore string class rather than the get string function being called to get language strings. And then at the end of that, you then add the settings to the admin tree, and you choose the branch in the admin tree. So this is being added to the local plugins branch of the admin tree. Okay. Optionally, if you want more control over the input form and the management and the checking or verification, validation of your form input, you can then point to an external settings page. Now, we've used that as an extension for the navigation in lesson 4 for our report plugin, but normally you would be pointing at a form which then gets the settings, does some stuff, validation or whatever, or changes the actual values, which it then saves as the configuration. Now, you can store those separately, or on the other hand, you can still use the setConfig function, the core MoodleLib API setConfig function, to store them as your plugin's configuration values. There is a disadvantage to doing this, and we'll talk about that a little later on when we're going through our code. And there's a link to the admin settings page. Right, so the pointing to an external page is fairly simple. Again, checking if the person has site config capabilities, and then creating an admin external page that points to another Moodle URL. And here in this presentation is a list of all the settings that you can use, and you'll notice they are very much they kind of very much mirror the elements that you can define with Moodle Forms. And there's a link for you to go and have a look at the documentation page. So let's go ahead and create our settings PHP file. So new PHP settings.php. So this is our file here, and similar to the example I gave you in the presentation, we are adding a new config checkbox. We need to define for all the feedback modules, you need to define a setting called default, and you'll see why in a short while. But anyway, and your names, the name of your setting needs to specify the component name / and then default. And again, notice the use of lang strings, and we need to define these strings now. So I've been through that in the presentation. It's obvious what it is doing. Okay, so let's swing to our language file and define our language strings. So we've got our two language strings there, enabled by default. If set, this feedback method will be enabled by default for all new assignments. So with just these three files, we can actually install our plugin, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to log in as admin, and we're going to install our plugin. Okay, we're good to go. Now watch, did you see that? This is what we missed in the previous lesson when we talked about the settings PHP file. When I talked about the situation whereby you had the disadvantage if you used the method we used in that lesson to get your config settings, then this wouldn't happen for your plugin. But because we've used the actual admin settings as required, as expected, we now get it noticing that we've got a setting, and then making the user have to look at the setting and decide whether they want to whether they want to change any of the default settings. So right now we can just click yes, we want it enabled by default in any new activities that are created, and save those changes. So I hope that makes sense. So let's see if this has made any changes to our activities. So if I go site home and let's go to our test and look at the assignment we looked at the last time, go to edit settings, and if we go down here and look at the feedback types, our feedback type is not there, so we still got to add some more functionality to get this working as expected. So let's go back to our code. Now the assignment feedback sub-plugin requires a local lib PHP file. Now with this harks back to the same issue we had in terms of our course format, in whether we define our classes in either libphp or local libphp, or do we define our classes in a different file inside our classes folder. Now this time round I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to actually define my class in the in a file in the classes folder, and then I will use local lib to require that file rather than define my class inside local lib PHP. So let's get started with that. So we go back, make sure we're in the right folder. We create a new file and we're going to call it local lib because it's required. That's part of the required files, and so this is my file. It's basically requiring a file that doesn't exist yet. So let's copy that name so we don't need to type it out. So we're going to now create that file, the classes assignment feed. So we create a new folder, classes, and we'll create a new file in that folder, assign underscore feedback underscore audio.php. So this is our new file. Now remember, this would normally have been defined in local lib, but we're trying to separate and reduce the use of local lib and use class files instead, which makes it clear to somebody looking at the code, okay, the classes are defined in the classes folder, and local lib will have miscellaneous functionality that doesn't quite fit anywhere and is required in different places. So our plugin, we're not using namespaces, so this is not going to be automatically it's not going to auto load, but even though we've stuck with the correct class name, so assign feedback audio, so we've got assign feedback audio as our class name, and we are extending assign feedback plugin, and we need to override one of the functions, which is get name, and we're going to return our plugin name that we've already defined in our language file to that call. So at this point, let's upgrade our version and go back into Moodle and have a look at what has changed. So log back in as admin. We'll need to upgrade our plugin. So we'll upgrade our plugin as usual, and then we'll swing back to our course as soon as it's done. We'll swing back to our course. Let's go back to test, and let's deal with assignment 2 again. I'm just going to change the name so it's obvious that this is the one we're working with. So let's just call that audio feedback assignment. Yeah, and if we go down here, let's have a look at the feedback types. As you can see, our audio feedback is there. It's enabled by default, and our help functionality is there too. Okay, so we have now the feedback actually showing. So now we're going to work on actually giving some feedback and getting the student to actually listen to the feedback that's been given to them. So I'm going to save that and return to course, and I'm going to log out actually. So let's give our plugin, sub-plugin some settings, and we're going to do that in our class. Okay. So we've got our get name from previously, and now we've got a new function, get settings, which is passed in a Moodle form. So into the form, remember we've discussed this before, that a lot of functions will get the form and you just add elements to the form. So we're going to add into the form an element called duration element, one of the advanced fields. And this is going to be the amount of time the audio is allowed to be recorded. So the length of the actual audio, the maximum length of it. So we're going to call that assign feedback audio time allowed, and the naming convention is important. So you've got to have your Frankenstein name, your component name as the prefix of your setting. So, and then we've got to define a string for that. Okay, and then we have we pass through duration. Part of these are the options for a duration field. We're only going to look at minutes and seconds, and the units are going to be just minutes and seconds, right? Okay, and then we add a help button, and we set the default to 1, so 1 minute is the default, and we hide it if our assigned feedback audio enabled is off. So if it's not checked, and I'll show you that in action in the interface in a short while. So that's our element. That's our element going on to the form. And then when the form is saved, we get back the data, and then we can set the configuration, our setting, to the duration element. Okay, so our configuration will be called duration, and it will be taking the data that has come from the assign feedback audio time allowed. Okay, and then you return true to tell it that you've saved the setting. And so for this we need to add some language strings, so let's do that. So our additional language strings, time allowed, the prompt for the checkbox, okay, and the help for it, right? I'm going to clear my cache on the command line off screen, and then we'll go back into Moodle and have a look at what happens next. So back into Moodle. It's going to take a little bit more time because obviously I've cleared my cache. I'm going to go back to our course, and let's look at our, turn editing on, and let's look at our assignment. If we go down here, back to our feedback types, and you'll notice that now we have a settings area. So if I turn that off, there's no more settings. We have the settings for feedback, comments. If we put both of them on, we'd have both the settings available. So that's the setting for audio feedback, and that's the setting for feedback comments. Okay, so we've got that, and let's just change that to 3 for the sake of it. And if we save it, we shouldn't have any errors. That's what will be stored, and that's what the limit of the recording will be. So now that we've got it kind of ready to go, we now need to find a way to actually collect the feedback. And now is the time we'll have a look at the JavaScript framework before we do, because we're going to be using JavaScript to do it. So Moodle's JavaScript framework. Now Moodle has been using, had been using, and still bits of it still using it, the Yahoo User Interface Library framework. That's been the framework of choice for Moodle JavaScript. But there's been no further development taking place on the a YUI library, which started life in 2005. So since Moodle 2.9, there's been a push to using jQuery and modules using the AMD API. There's a link to the AMD API stuff for you to follow and find out more. Okay. So Moodle includes jQuery as an AMD module for the framework, for the JavaScript framework. So that means jQuery is available to all AMD JavaScript and can be listed as a dependency for your module and required to load it. Okay. In Moodle 3.9, jQuery 3.4.1 is standard. I'm not quite sure. I think it's still 3.4.1 in 3.11, but you can always go and have a look at the documentation to make sure you know what you're dealing with. So in terms of Ajax, Moodle definitely prefers the use of JSON rather than XML. So Ajax functionality is provided as a JavaScript module called core/Ajax. However, it's really the module that's in Moodle is designed to work really well with web services, and sometimes you find yourself having to use the $, which is jQuery, .ajax to do other stuff Ajax related. So you can have a look at the documentation. Again, there's a link for you to have a look at the Ajax aspect of the JavaScript framework. Then we've got jQuery's UI, user interface libraries. Now, it's not recommended to be used with Moodle because some of the CSS actually conflicts with Bootstrap, and even if you're doing something outside of Moodle, I've heard of issues where UI and Bootstrap don't play nicely together. Okay, so but if you really want to, there is an AMD module in Moodle to be able to use it. So the complications with JavaScript now. Since Moodle 3.8, even in developer mode, your JavaScript is served minimized, right? So the setting that we discussed earlier on in lesson 2 about your config settings for your development environment. In fact, it might have been lesson 1, but anyway, we've come across this, the cache.js configuration setting in your config.php file. Okay, if that's set to false, then Moodle will send the corresponding source map files for the modules in developer mode, so you can still debug your JavaScript is much easier than trying to look through minimized JavaScript. Okay, right. And since you got to sort of compile your JavaScript, then you have to look at the JavaScript modules page on the Moodle site to look at what you need to install. And this is stuff you put on your development server. It's not what you put on the live server. It's just to turn your JavaScript into minimized JavaScript using those tools on the screen. So the core modules. So there are several core modules that are available to you to use in your JavaScript. So you've got core/config, so you can work with configuration settings. So you kind of get config, set config stuff. Language strings, so you can use your language strings in your JavaScript. Notifications, so you can notify users of particular issues, so alert boxes, etc. You've got a URL module, and we've spoke about the Ajax, and we also got a modal core module for working with modal windows, and all of the core modules are defined in the lib AMD SCR source directory, and you can have a look at the documentation at that link as well. So now let's think about our plugin. So we are going to use to collect this audio feedback, we're going to use JavaScript's own media devices interface. There's a link to it there. We're also going to use the media recorder object from the core JavaScript functionality, and we're going to wrap all this up in an AMD module. Now I've put on this presentation, you can download it from that particular URL on the screen, but there's a zip file in the lesson that you can download and use it from there, and I think it's also in the source code that is in the lesson, where you can get a copy of it as well. So instead of going through all the issues of installing, running AMD, that's for another time. We just get the already minimized files and the source file as well from the lesson. So switching back to our code, I've taken the opportunity to download the AMD folder and stick it in the plugins directory. So the AMD is the folder in which your JavaScript needs to live in, and after you've run the tools, you'll have a build and a source folder in there. And let's have a quick look at record.me.js. So I'm not really going to go into the functionality in the actual script itself. You can do that on your own, but basically to just talk about a couple of things. So what we've got coming through is jQuery, the core string, which I mentioned in our presentation, and the core notification. These are the modules that are coming in, and they will be defined as $ for Ajax for the jQuery, string for the string, and notification for the notification. Okay. We are in one thing to note in here is that we are not going to be using the core Ajax functionality. In fact, we will be using $Ajax for our Ajax calls. Okay, so you can look through the file and read through it, but remember you need the build and the minimized JavaScript and the map files defined for it to work after Moodle 3.8. So before I close this file, something else. If you look down here, we've got our get strings, and we are calling through some strings. So using our core AMD module, we get these strings for our JavaScript, and so we'll need to go and define them. So I'll just close this file and we'll go back to define the strings. And so there's our strings been defined, starting from down here. No microphone, you have not allowed access to your microphone, all the way down to OK. This probably defined somewhere in the core, but I'm defining it again for our own plugin. So we've got several items there, and this is all for the JavaScript. So let's now consider how we actually get the user to provide the feedback. So we'll go back to our class and we'll add in some functionality. So we have a new function here, get form elements for user. Okay, and what gets passed into this function or the method is the grade, a Moodle quick form, data, if the standard data, and this is if there's data to be used by the form, and the user ID in question, the user who's actually using the system at the time. Okay, so we set our parameters for passing to our JavaScript. Okay, we set our post URL to get recording PHP, which we have not defined yet. So we're going to have a file of script that's going to collect the recording. So we've set that to our post URL. The maximum duration, we get the configuration setting that we've dealt with earlier, the duration of the actual recording, the maximum duration. The grade ID from the grade is a standard object, and the context ID to get the context of our current assignment. Okay, and then here is where we include as such our JavaScript. So page requires JS call AMD, and we give it our assignment feedback record me, call the init function with the parameters when you call it. So that's setting up our JavaScript for the page. Then we get into creating our form. So we have a header, and then we add a static element, another one of the advanced form elements. Basically just put static text in the form, okay? And so we have that as a bit of help, because the help string sometimes isn't quite clear, or people don't actually look at the help. So this is to go on the screen. We then add some HTML, okay, and we have a hidden element. So we've added an HTML element, we've added a hidden element, and we set out our file type for that hidden element as a param text. You don't set a type for HTML elements. And then we've created a button array, and here's an example of using create element instead of add element. So we start off with an array, we get a reference to a button, so we create one button and add it to our array, the reference to that one. So we create 4 buttons in total. So we've got 4 create elements, all creating a button. So we've got a start button, a stop button, a listen button, and a delete button, okay? And then we add the whole the array to the form using the add group method. So there's an example. We add an element, an HTML element, to add a line break to give us a little bit of space under the group, okay? And we return true. So we need to define some strings. So let's go back to our strings file. And so the additional strings are here. So we've got things like start recording, record feedback, listen to recording, remove recording, the static prompt, maximum recording time is this, and stop recording and stop listening. So these are for our buttons, the labels for our buttons. So we're going to upgrade and then go and have a look and see what all this comes together in Moodle like. So we'll turn that into a 2, save that, and back at Moodle, log back in. We'll do our upgrade first. Okay, so I'm going to log out as admin user and log in as a teacher, and then look at that assignment, because we want to look at it from the point of view of somebody who will be actually having to use it. But before we do that, I need to make sure that the teacher is enrolled in our test course. So let's look at our participants and see if we've got a teacher in there. Doesn't look like it, so let's go and enroll users. Look for teacher. It's definitely not enrolled, and set them as the teacher in this course. So we've enrolled the teacher, so I can log in and log out and then log in as the teacher. So let's log in as teacher, and we'll go to our course, our test course. And if I click on the audio feedback assignment, I've got view all submissions and grade. So we'll click on the grade button, and this brings up the grading screen. Now this is where you can give a grade, so 80% or whatever it is you're grading the student. Our student is Leah Becker, and down here we have our audio feedback settings. So there's our buttons that we defined, there's our static text, there's our header for our section, so we can record some feedback. Well done, Leah. Keep up the good work. So it says your recording has not been saved. Why? Because we haven't got the functionality to actually save the recording. But can I listen to it? done, Leah. Keep up the good work. So, and I can remove the recording. So listen to the recording, record the feedback, stop recording. So I can stop recording as I'm doing the feedback. I can start again. Well done, Leah. Well done. I hope you keep up this good work. Stop the recording, okay? Listen to the recording. Well done, Leah. Well done. I hope you keep up this good work. So what we're going to do now is go back and actually capture the audio so that Leah can actually listen to the feedback. So click course, leave this page, and we'll log out and go back to our code. So back in our code, we need to define our get recording PHP file whose sole purpose is to get the audio recording, save it to a draft file area, and return the draft file ID, the draft file or the draft area ID back to the JavaScript, so we can save the file when the feedback is actually saved. So let's do that. Let's close these little bits here and create our new file called get recording. Now, before we look through this file, if you have looked through the JavaScript, you'll notice that the delete button doesn't actually make a call to delete the file, the draft file. And that's because draft files are eventually cleaned up by Moodle Core anyway. If they have not been saved to a plugins area or a file area, the draft files are cleaned up and you don't really need to worry about deleting the file if you don't want to. So anyway, let's look at our get recording PHP. So at the top here, we've defined Ajax script true. All Ajax specific scripts need to define this at the top. Okay, and this lets Moodle know that this script deals with Ajax requests. Okay, right, and then we do require the config PHP file, and we are also going to require a lib PHP file. In our lib PHP file, we're going to put some functionality that's going to assist our plugin. Okay, so here we go. What happens from the JavaScript, from the Ajax, we get an action parameter action, and if it's empty, we know we've got a problem, and we'll catch that. But then we catch the action, and then we look at the different, there's only one action really, and that the action is save. So, and this is a case whereby using the file API does not work for us, right? So we have to work directly with the $_files global, PHP global. So we're looking here, we look at the file stuff. If there's no file sent, we create an error. If we look for if there is files is defined, file _files is defined, and we have a name, and the name of that is not audio. We check to see whether in files we have audio file defined. Okay, and if it's not, we send an error. We check for a grade ID. If we haven't got one, we send an error. We check for a context ID. If we haven't got one, we send back an error. And then finally, what we do is we then save our uploaded file with the file, the grade ID, and the context ID, and we get back a temp file reference. Where's this function? This function is going to be in our lib PHP. Then we catch any exceptions and throw back an error if we have to send back an error. Otherwise, we send back the response, which is the file reference for the temp file ref. So really, this is the file the draft file ID, draft area file ID that's going back to the script. And if you remember, in our form, we have a hidden field in our form with that name, and so that will set that hidden field to that value via the JavaScript. Okay, and then we have our default checks there. So we have to define some strings. So go back to our strings file, and so our new strings are these things like, no file has been sent, no action specified, invalid action, no grade ID, no context ID, and the Moodle error message as our A variable. Okay, so that's in our strings. So now we need to turn our attention to the lib.php file and add some functionality that get recording's been calling. So we create the file, new file, so this is our lib.php. It just occurred to me that we could have used local lib.php instead, which we have already had defined, and required it from our get recording, but we're down the road now, so we'll leave it as it is. So we've got our usual stuff at the top. We require the file lib.php because it's not loaded by the time this it's not loaded for us when we run this. So we have our three functions: send Ajax error, return Ajax response, and save uploaded audio. So these two, send error and return Ajax response, are kind of standard JSON encode content sent back to the Ajax response, back to the JavaScript. Okay, but let's have a look at our save uploaded audio. So we've got a file come through, the grade ID and the context ID. So the file that's been sent through is basically the global file, underscore file PHP global. We check if the file actually exists, and if it's got a size, it's not empty. Okay, so and then we get an unused draft item ID. So we basically get a draft item ID from the core file lib. That's where our file lib comes in, and then we change the name of our file because the format that the JavaScript libraries save audio is WebM. So we create the correct, give it the correct extension, file extension. Then we get our file storage and we create a file record. So we get our context ID, we're going to save it in the user area, component is user, and in the draft area called draft. The item ID will be our draft item ID, the path is just simply a slash, and then the file name as the file name. And then we create a file from path name. So this is now creating a draft file inside the Moodle internal file system. Okay, we're taking it off disk where it's been saved standard PHP way, and we are now turning it into an internal file for Moodle. Our draft ID, item ID, is what gets sent back to the caller, which is then sent back to the JavaScript, and that's how we save this file. And so and then we send any errors that we come across if needs be. Okay. And so now we are saving the draft file, or the file in the draft area. We need to think about how we move it when eventually the tutor saves the feedback, how we're going to actually save that file. So we need to go back to our class. So we've added some functionality in our class. We have a function is feedback modified, and this is called for the system to actually call, or the core to call the save function. So it checks to see if the feedback has been modified, and if it is, then the save method is called. Otherwise the save method isn't called. So what comes in is the grade and the data, but all we really want to do is check the form data and see if the file ref field or element has been set. If it has, it means that they've actually recorded a draft file. If it hasn't, that means a file reference is not available, so the feedback has not been modified. Okay, then our main function is save. And before we discuss save, there's two private functions that have been created that are related to this. One is get file params, and it's been created because it's going to be called again from somewhere else. And then we've actually got, it's not even a private one, it's a public function that is called isEmpty, and that checks to see whether there's an existing feedback file in a particular area. Okay, so and you can see it's also calling the get file params private function. So let's look mainly, so it's simple. isEmpty gets the file storage. Our grade ID is what we have to identify our file, so it's the item ID for the file. So we get the file params pushing through the grade ID, and then we check if the file exists using the file params we get back from there. Okay, and the get file params just sets some like default params for an existing file. So we get the context ID, our component name, we're saving our files in the feedback area, our grade IDs, our item ID gives us the that's what identifies the specific feedback file, and then a couple more parameters. Okay, so let's look at our save function. So save, we get coming in the grade object and the form data. So our context ID is always the assignment, it's the assignment's context ID. We get the file storage. We then get all the area files from the draft area. Remember, we set this with our draft file. So we've got a context ID. We saved the draft file in the user draft area, and our file reference is the ID of the file in the draft file. No, this is the actual draft file area ID. So we're getting the files, those files from the draft file area. Okay. We should only expect one file, so we're just going to pop off the files that come through, and then we create a new file record for the file that's going to exist in our file area. So our parameters for our new file record is our context ID, our component name. We're going to put it in the feedback file area. Our item ID is going to be the grade ID of the grade, and then we'll get the file path and the file name from the draft file record itself, okay, or object itself. Okay. Then before we dive in and save the file, we check to see whether we have to get rid of a previous recording. We only want one feedback recording per grade. So we check, calling that public function that we looked at a little earlier on, using the grade, passing the grade. If that comes back and says it's not empty, we then get the file params again, the private function. We get the params. We take off a couple of the end bits of the params array, because we don't need it to call our delete area files function or method. So, and then that will delete the file, and then we can go ahead and create our new stored file in our file area from the draft file using the parameters that we have defined for the new file. And that's it. That's the file saved. Okay, so now what we can do is upgrade and actually go and see what's going on in Moodle itself. So let's upgrade. My version file seems to be hidden, right? We'll upgrade. Now, because I want to go and view the or do the feedback as a teacher, this would mean I would have to log in as an admin, upgrade, then log out and log in as a teacher. So this time instead I'm going to upgrade on the command line, and I'll show you that because it's quite useful to be able to do the upgrade on the command line rather than having to log in and then sometimes having to log out again to continue what you are trying to test. So let's do that. So this is the command. It's admin CLI upgrade PHP. Obviously you could do the sudo and run it as the web server user if you wanted to, or depending on your setup. This works for me, so I'll just go ahead and upgrade here on the command line. So now I can go back to Moodle and just log in as a teacher and not have to go through the palaver of upgrading through the interface. So I'm going to log in as the teacher, and we'll go back to our test course, and we'll go and look and grade. Go to grade. Our Leah Becker is there, ready to go. We give a grade, okay, and we have our audio feedback. So let's record some feedback. Well done, Leah. I hope you keep up the good work. Record. Listen to the recording. Well done, Leah. I hope you keep up the good work. And so I can now just save that. Now, obviously I've saved it, but there's no way to tell here currently that there's now some feedback previously done. So somebody else coming along, another teacher to grade Leah, won't realize that feedback has already been given. So we need to display something to allow the user to actually listen to previous feedback, and at the same time we need to allow the student themselves, when you log in as Leah Becker, to listen to the recording. So before we go back, you need to take a note of Leah's username there, so that you can log in as her at a later point. So we'll go back to our course and we'll log out. So log out. So before we dive into actually doing something so that both the teacher and the pupil or the student can actually listen to the feedback, we need to look at our delivering the actual feedback file, which you'll remember from our file API discussion, needs to be defined in lib.php. But before I do that, I'm going to get rid of some of these files here. We're not going to use get recording again. Local lib's got nothing in it, and we're unlikely to use settings again. So we have some space so we can work with. Okay, so we're going back to lib.php, and we're going to add in our function to deliver the file. So our additional function is our plugin file function, and named in the proper way with our component name, our Frankenstein name underscore plugin file, with the usual suspects being passed in. Now we've discussed this function before previously, so there's not really much different from what we did before. We basically check the context level to ensure that we're at the context of a module. If we're not, then there's something else wrong. If we check if our file area is defined as feedback, because that's where we are keeping our feedback files, in our feedback file area, we check and require the user to be logged in. We get the item ID, which remember is actually the grade ID, and then you remember this, it's kind of the same as we did the last time. So we get the file storage, we get the file out of the file storage, and then if we don't get a file, we return false. Otherwise we send back the file with a much less time to live period this time. So that's how this will be what delivers the actual audio file to the browser. Okay, so let's go back to our class and add some functionality there. So our new functions follow on from our isEmpty function that we used previously, and I've defined private function called render audio controls, and it expects the grade ID and optional title parameter to come through. So we've got content, we set that to an empty string. We get our file params. Again, we're calling our little function that gets us the params that we need to get the file. So we get the file storage, we get all the area files again. We only expect one, so we pop it off, we pop the value of the array, and then we call our useful function make plugin file URL. Remember this? So starting to sound familiar. So we get the context ID, etc., 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 and we create a URL for our file. And then again, we could have used a renderer here, but it seems to be a little bit of overkill for just a little bit of HTML. So here we go, we create some HTML. I could have also used the HTML underscore writer classes to do this, but I've chosen not to on this occasion. So we've got a div and a div, and then we have an audio controls tag with the source being set to our Moodle plugin file URL, and then in there we've got a note to say browser doesn't support. Should have used a language string, but there you go. Your browser does not support the audio tag, and that's the bit of content, HTML content, that is going to go into the page. And then if we have defined a title, we add the title on top of the content, so we have a title there, and we return the content. So when is our private function called? It is called when the assignment plugin calls for the view summary, and before view summary is called, isEmpty is called. So if you return false from isEmpty, then view summary will not be called. If there is a summary, if the feedback is not empty, then view summary is called. Now there are two functions that deal with displaying feedback. View summary is a summary of the feedback if, for example, you have something that requires a proper view of a whole page view, for example. Okay. The view summary would give the user a bit of a summary, and if you wanted a link to the view to view the whole feedback, you would then set this parameter that's coming in. It's a Boolean value, and it's being passed in by reference to true, and that will mean that a link to view more content will be then made available to the user on the UI. And then you would have to define a function called public function view and actually then display the full feedback. Now we don't need it because we basically have just a small snippet of HTML to insert, and that will fit in our summary view. But if you had to show a whole page of feedback or whatever, you would then set that show view link to true. Okay. Now it's defined as a private function because it will be called from a different area when we try and provide the teacher or the tutor with a way to review existing feedback. This view summary is for the student to view the feedback. And now that we've defined that, let's go and log in as Leah and see if we can listen to our feedback. So back in Moodle, Leah was 48. I'll use the same password. I know they've got the same password. I'll log in. I'll save it for now. I don't think I'll need it again though. And then we'll go to our test course, and we'll look at the audio feedback. Right, and so I've been graded, so it tells me I've been graded. This is the submission status, and then we've got our feedback down here. So we gave a 75, it was graded on this, graded by the teacher, and then we can listen. Let's turn that volume down a little bit. Let's hear.
Well done, Leah.
Keep up the good work. So they can listen, she can listen to her feedback. Okay, so let's log out and let's see what it looks like to our teacher. If I click grade, so we still can't see our previous audio feedback. So I'm going to go back to the course. I'm not going to log out, and we'll go back to our code. So back in our code, we'll add some more functionality, right? So what have we added in now? If we go back to our function where we defined our buttons and what have you to collect the feedback, we actually check to see whether we've got a grade ID. If a grade ID exists, we can then render the audio controls. So we have we've got a string we need to define for the title. We then call our render audio controls private method and then add that on as HTML. Okay, so let's add the string in for our existing feedback and in our language file. And so this is it. We've added it in, and it's existing audio feedback. Now I'm going to clear my cache off screen on the command line, and then we'll go back to Moodle. So back in Moodle, let's go back into our assignment, and let's go to grade. And now we're back with Leah Becker with the current grade that's in the grade book, and we now have an opportunity to listen to the feedback. Saying, Leah, I expect much more harder work from you. You should have got a better grade than this. So that's basically our audio. We could record a new one, a new feedback. Leah, I hope you're going to try harder than this next time. Leah, I hope you're going to try harder than this next time. And then if I save the changes, come back again, we've got our audio feedback. Can we listen? Leah, I hope you're going to try harder than this next time. So that's it for our plugin. Let's go and review what we've done in this lesson. And that's it for lesson 7. In this lesson, we developed an assignment feedback sub-plugin. We had a look and used the admin settings API and the JavaScript framework.